The smell hit you the second you opened the front door. Steam on the windows, a pan lid rattling on the stove, and your mum shouting that your tea was on the table and to get your hands washed before it went cold. She called it your tea, never your dinner, and if you turned your nose up at it, you were told there were children who would be glad of it. And she was not exaggerating. Food rationing in Britain did not end until midnight on the 4th of July, 1954, 14 years after it began, with meat the very last thing to come off the ration. In those years, the average family spent around 40% of everything they earned just on food. Today, it is nearer 20. And yet, out of all that going without, this country produced some of the most comforting food it has ever made. It was cheap as anything, hot as the hobs of hell, and every mouthful is burned into the memory of everyone who grew up on it. Here are the winter meals that raised a whole nation, and the last one on this list started more arguments at the tea table than any other. Beef stew and dumplings was the one that told you winter had properly arrived. A bit of cheap shin or scrag end from the butcher, the sort of cut nobody wants now, and half the shops do not even carry anymore, left to simmer all day on a low light, with onions and a spoon of pearl barley until the meat gave up and fell apart. And a little went a very long way, which mattered because at the height of rationing, the entire weekly meat allowance for one adult was worth about a shilling and roughly 2 chops to last the week. A pot of stew was how you made almost nothing feed everyone. The smell of it filled the house from about 2 o'clock, so that by the time you got in from school, your stomach was already going. And then the dumplings went on top. Great balls of suet and flour dropped in for the last 20 minutes, coming out light as anything on top and soaked in gravy underneath. Your nan never weighed a single thing in her life, and hers were always perfect. And if you asked her for the recipe, she would say, a bit of this and a handful of that, and leave you none the wiser. You mopped the bowl clean with a doorstep of bread and butter, and on a freezing night there was simply nothing better. Toad in the hole was the dinner that made a few bangers go a very long way. Cheap sausages laid in a smoking hot tin, a jug of Yorkshire pudding batter poured round them and into a fierce oven until the batter climbed up the sides and went golden and crisp. The corners were the prize. There was always a bit of a scrap over who got the crunchy edges, and if there was a soggy bit in the middle, well, nobody was going to leave it. Drowned in thick onion gravy, it was a Wednesday sort of tea that felt like a treat. Bubble and Squeak was born entirely out of make, do and mend. Come Monday, whatever was left from the Sunday roast, the cold spuds, the cabbage, the greens gone limp in the pan, got chopped together and fried in a spoon of dripping until the bottom went dark and crisp. And you used it up quick because just after the war, only 2 households in every 100 in Britain owned a fridge. Nothing could sit around, so nothing was wasted. The name was the sound of it, the bubble and the squeak as it spat in the pan. Nothing, and I mean nothing, went in the bin in those days. And here is the funny thing. Warmed up and fried the next day, it somehow tasted better than half the dinners it came from. Liver and onions divided every household in the land straight down the middle. A few slices of lamb's liver fried quick with a great heap of onions and a thick brown gravy served on a mound of mash to soak it all up. You were either the child who wolfed it down or the child who sat at the table until it went cold, pushing it round the plate because you were not getting your afters until that liver was gone. It was on the table in 20 minutes and it cost next to nothing, which is exactly why your mum made it, whether you liked it or not. Now, coming up in a minute, there is one dish on this list that is so tied to one British city that the people who live there are actually named after it. You will know it the second you hear it, and you will know exactly which city too. Keep that in the back of your mind because we are coming to it. And on the subject of dishes that nearly got lost, a lot of you have asked whether these old recipes are written down anywhere, because so many of them were never really recipes at all. Just a bit of this and a handful of that kept in your nan's head and lost when she went. So we did something about it. We have put together a book called Forgotten British Recipes We Grew Up With. 53 of these dishes from the 1940s through to the early 80s, written down properly at last, each one with the decade it belongs to and a note that takes you straight back to the kitchen it came from. If that sounds like your sort of thing, there is a link waiting for you down in the description. Right, back to the food, and that dish is not far off now. Cottage pie meant a proper knife and fork sit down. Mince cooked down with onions and gravy, spooned into a dish and covered over with a thick blanket of mash. You dragged a fork across the top to make the ridges, because everyone knew the ridges were the bit that crisped up, golden and crunchy in the oven. It was warm warm, it was heavy, and it did for you completely. 10 minutes after your last mouthful, you were spark out on the tea in front of the telly, and nobody blamed you. Faggots and peas is a proper old black country and South Wales favourite, and it was thrift turned into an art form. Little parcels of seasoned minced pork and offal, wrapped in caul fat, baked slow, and swimming in rich onion gravy, with a heap of mushy peas and mash alongside. The name comes from an old word for a bundle, nothing more sinister than that. It used the bits of the animal that nobody else wanted and turned them into one of the most comforting plates of food this country has ever put on a cold table. Miners and factory men swore by them, and up in the Midlands folk still do. Steak and kidney pudding was the king of the lot, and it took your mum half a day to make. Meat cooked soft, sealed up inside a suet crust, and steamed for hours in a basin with a cloth tied over the top, filling the whole house with steam and that smell that told you something proper was coming. When it was turned out and you cut the crust open, the gravy came flooding out across the plate. Half a day of work, gone in about 9 minutes flat, and not a soul at that table complained about the trade. And if there was a kidney in your spoonful and you were not keen, you learned very quickly to swallow it and say nothing, because there was no leaving it, and there was certainly no afters until the plate was clean. Smoked haddock in milk was the Friday tea, and you could smell it the second you came through the door. A piece of bright yellow smoked haddock, poached gentle in a pan of milk on the top of the stove, the milk turned into a simple white sauce, and a couple of slices of bread and butter to mop it all up. For a whole generation, that smell of fish and warm milk on a Friday evening is childhood itself, whether you loved it at the time or not. Pea and ham soup was what your mum made when the cupboard was looking bare and payday felt a long way off. A ham bone saved from a joint, a handful of dried split peas left to soak overnight, an onion, whatever sad old carrot was rolling about the bottom of the veg rack, all in one pot on a low light all afternoon. It came out thick enough to stand your spoon up in. A bowl of that and a hunk of bread, and you could walk to school through a blizzard and not feel a thing. And here is the dish I promised you. Scouse gave the people of Liverpool their very name, and if that is not a mark of how much a meal can mean to a place, nothing is. That is where the word Scouser comes from, a whole city named after its winter stew. It is a slow-cooked pot of cheap meat and potatoes and onions, cooked down until it barely needs a spoon, and if money was really tight that week, you left the meat out altogether and called it blind scouse, and nobody thought any the less of you for it. Served with a bit of pickled red cabbage or a round of bread, it warmed the whole of Merseyside through many a hard winter. Bread and dripping was less a meal than a way of life, and every child of that era remembers it. And bread did more heavy lifting than we ever realized. In the 1940s, bread and flour alone made up around 30% of all the energy in the average household's diet. It was the thing that filled the gap when there was little else, and dripping made it a treat. The dripping was the fat and the meaty jelly left in the tin after the Sunday roast, saved in a bowl in the larder and spread thick on a doorstep of bread with a good shake of salt. The best bit, everyone agreed, was the dark brown jelly at the bottom of the bowl, and there was open warfare in some houses over who got to it first. That was your tea or your snack, or the thing that kept you going till the proper dinner. It sounds like nothing. A dietitian today would take one look at it and need a lie down, but ask anyone who grew up on it, and they will tell you they would give a great deal to taste that exact thing one more time. And no winter tea was ever finished without your afters, because a British pudding was not a luxury, it was the law. Spotted dick, jam poli, treacle sponge, all of them steamed in a basin, the same as the savoury puddings, and all of them buried under a great pour of hot custard, cheap to make and heavy enough to sink a battleship, and there was always a row over who got the skin off the top of the custard, prize to some, punishment to others. That was how a cold, dark, ordinary evening was turned into something worth coming home for. Every one of these was built out of almost nothing. That was the way of it, when a good cook could feed a whole family on the cheapest cuts, yesterday's leftovers, and a bit of imagination, and nobody ever went to bed hungry. It was not fancy, and it was never meant to be, but out of all that thrift came the most comforting food this country has ever known. Warm kitchens, steamed up windows, and your mum calling you in from the cold for your tea. So which one takes you straight back? And what did your mum or your nan make on a winter's night that I have gone and missed? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and if this warmed you up, subscribe to Dear Old Britain, and the next trip down memory lane is waiting for you on screen right now.